So the question is, where exactly should you be low passing your heavy guitar tracks in your mix? 6K, 8K, 10K? Does it even matter? And also, how tightly should you be editing your guitar tracks? Super tight, medium tight, or completely natural? And finally, what's the best way to set expectations accordingly when dealing with clients in the studio? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 24. So without any further ado, let's dive into this excellent group of questions submitted by my loyal email subscribers. And our first question here comes from Mr. Jason. Hey Bobby, wanting to ask this question. Editing, EQing, etc. is great to learn, but I find it's difficult to have a good starting point as in setting levels correctly. How high should my kick, snare, guitar, or bass be? And the hardest is having the vocals sitting right in the mix. How high should the vocals be? And why is it so different from song to song? Thanks, Jay. Okay, well, Jason, I love this question, and I'm gonna be brutally honest. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to this question. As far as appropriate levels, there's no such thing. It all comes down to the song itself, the musicians, your taste as a mixer, and what you like to hear. For example, some mixers like Steve Albini prefer vocals sitting quieter in the mix. And mixers that mix more poppy style records or more modern style records like their vocals a little louder. Some people like vocals loud, some people like vocals a little quieter and a little more in with the rest of the band. It all comes down to personal preference. But with all of this being said, I'm gonna share with you my approach. In general, I like to get my kicks sitting roughly around -18 to -16 dB, which is around 0 dB analog. It's just my own, habit that I've gotten into. And once I have my kick sitting there, then I bring up the other elements of my drums. And I make sure my drums are sitting right in and of themselves. Then I bring in my bass or guitars and then my vocals. I find that when I mix in this way, everything is kind of structured and I'm building my foundation and then dropping everything else in on top of that. That works for me. I suggest giving it a shot. Hopefully it'll give you a little more structure to your mixing, so you're not just randomly, bringing up guitars, then bringing up your overheads, then dropping in your vocals. But again, if that works for you, stick with it. But that's the system that I personally use, and I stick with it on almost every single mix, and it helps kind of eliminate that whole thing where we get caught in our heads and we overthink the mix. Because when it comes to levels, there are no rules, and it all comes down to personal preference. Excellent question, and let me know how that works out for you. Okay, our next question here comes from Marvin. Hey dude, first of all, love your content and the stuff you do for the mixing and mastering community. Now to my question. When you record fast guitar tremolos, say black/death metal, do you go through the process of editing every single guitar stroke, or do you just leave it as is? Thank you. Okay, well, Marvin, I love this question, and everyone is gonna have their own personal, preference with this, but I'm gonna share with you how I approach editing guitars in general. I like my production sounding really tight and really crisp, but still natural and still like a band that's actually playing in a room together. For example, a genre like djent calls for guitars to be inhumanly tight. And I have seen guys go in there and edit every single guitar stroke so that it's perfect and sitting 100% on the grid. I personally don't do this unless I'm specifically working with a djent project or a djent band. What I like to do when working with, for example, a black metal or death metal band is make sure that the tremolos are in the pocket, meaning nothing is pushing the beat, and that they're relatively in sync with one another. And for me, that usually gives me a tight enough sound if I'm working with a decent guitar player that sounds tight, crisp, and clear, but still like a natural band. I don't want people listening to my productions noticing the editing. I want it to be completely seamless and really realistic sounding. So again, give that a shot. I don't think you have to go in there and edit every single little tremolo stroke. That's gonna end up sounding fake, unless that's the sound you're going for. If you're going for a more old school natural sound, it doesn't have to be sloppy. The guitars don't have to be all over the place. Just make sure that they're tight, but still in the pocket. Excellent question, and keep me posted on your progress. Okay, our next question here comes from Mr. Sebastian. Hello! Is a 6K low pass filter too much on distorted guitar? I'm using a Marshall JMP2203 amp sim and running real pedals into the low input. I feel like the high end is a bit harsh and I'm using a 6K to 7K low pass filter. Is that killing my tone or something? I'm new with amp sims. Okay, well Sebastian, I love this question, and to be honest with you, it all comes down to the amp you're recording or the amp sim you're using or the impulse response that you're using. Me personally, I have found that when I use Marshall cabs or even impulse responses of Marshall cabs, they're generally a lot more fizzy sounding. Not necessarily bad, they just sound more fizzy sounding to me than, let's say a Mesa Boogie with a V30 speaker that generally has a smoother top end. So in these cases, I will not hesitate to use a very, very extreme low pass filter at, like you said, 6K. But the thing is, you can also have a shallow slope. Your slope doesn't have to be super duper extreme. You can still leave some of that air in place by using a shallower low pass filter. So all of that fizz is more subdued, but still kind of there, lower in your guitar tone. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, the way that I like to approach guitar recording and guitar production is I try to get all of that fizz out of the guitar tone at the source. And the way I do this is by being extremely picky with mic placement or by using a solid impulse response. And on that topic, if you're looking for an impulse response that's less fizzy at the source, like what you're mentioning, I would highly recommend my IR Octapack. You get 8 impulse responses, 4 microphones, 2 mic placements per microphone. You get impulse responses of 2 SM57s, 2 SM81s, 2 Sennheiser E609s, as well as 2 Electro Voice RE16s. The Octapack is absolutely free, and you could download it by clicking the link in this video's description. So Sebastian, what you're mentioning is completely normal. I find that I have to do the same thing, low passing a little lower than I normally would. Normally I low pass at around 10 to 12K if I'm working with a solid impulse response or cab. But with Marshall cabs, again, they're more fizzy, so I have to be a little more extreme. Or try one of my impulse responses from the Octapack. It's absolutely free. And in that case, you probably won't have to low pass as heavily. So dude, give one of those 2 options a shot and let me know how it works out for you. Okay, and we have a final excellent question here from Alex. Let's check it out. I'm starting to record bands using my mobile rig. Thing is, as we all know, there's a bunch of information that you need to convey to a band before you start recording them. Be it making sure they know to have their guitars freshly restrung and set up, or drums reheaded and tuned, or being super well rehearsed. For mixing, it could mean labeling tracks properly, supplying DIs, or making sure stuff is edited correctly by the recording engineer. At the other end of the spectrum, there are basic business issues, like making sure they're aware of how and when to pay you, or for how many hours a day you will work and how many breaks you will take. Basically, it seems like to convey all this information would mean dumping a huge document of instructions on them, and would be, at best, information overload. Or at worst, you could come across as a bit of a demanding. How do you make sure that your clients know all that they need to do to make a great sounding record without falling into this trap? As ever, thanks for all your advice. Alex. Okay, Alex, when it comes to the business end of the spectrum, when it comes to running your own studio, I can go on and on. I love this topic. And this is a great question, and it's something that I struggled with personally for the longest time. I'm gonna be honest, by nature, I'm a yes man. I like to just say yes to all projects that come through. If there's something the band used to want back in the day that I knew wasn't a great idea, I would generally bend to what they wanted. And a lot of the times it would end up biting me in the ass. So here's what I do and what I've been doing since I really started taking my business seriously and working with the clients that I wanted to work with. When a band contacts me and they want to work with me, I leave no stone left unturned. I send a detailed PDF that contains all of the information that they need to know, and I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions that they might ask. Now, I'm not gonna lie, some bands object to the way that I work in some ways. For example, I reamp guitars. I rarely record amps live. For me, it's a waste of time, especially when there's so much editing involved and punching in and all that. And some bands don't like that, and you know what? I just don't work with them. There are enough bands that do prefer the way that I work, and I concentrate my efforts on working with those people because it's a right fit and ends up being a lot more enjoyable at the end of the day. And I wouldn't worry too much about seeming like you're demanding. My PDF is extremely straightforward. It's less than 2 pages. And if you're interested in reading it, just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. You're more than welcome to check it out. It's straight and to the point. It tells them that I need all the pre-production, that they need to have their tempos mapped, and all of the other details, like you mentioned, restringing your guitars, new drum heads, all that stuff, so they know exactly what they need before entering the studio with me. The truth is that if a band contacts you interested in working with you, it's probably because they like the sound of your productions and maybe they've heard good things about you from other bands. So if they're unwilling to work with you and they, resist a lot of what you ask for, believe me, they are not worth working with. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience. The good news is that most of the bands that hit you up are hitting you up, like I said, for a reason, because I like your work. And on top of everything else, if a band is serious enough to hire a producer to, make their vision come to life, their musical vision, then they're probably gonna be willing to change their strings, change their drum heads. And if they're not, then they're not a serious band. Alex, excellent question. And again, if you're interested in checking out my PDF, shoot me an email and I'll send it over to you. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone for submitting this excellent group of questions. And if you sent me a question and I haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I will definitely get to it within one of these videos in this series. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and a ton of other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. And again, if you're struggling with your guitar tone and you're in need of some decent impulse responses, you could download my IR Octapack for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. And until next time, happy mixing.